Hi, everybody. So, as a practicing librarian, what I enjoy doing is not only using library resources to assist patrons in their informational needs and finding items, but also educating the patronage in how to use library resources for themselves, if so inclined to learn. Reader's Advisory is a library function service where advice is provided for readers who would like recommendations on similar authors and titles of interest. Three notable resources for Reader's Advisory are Goodreads, Literature Map, and Novelist Plus. I'd like to teach how to use those three. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so we'll start with Literature Map. What you do is you type in an author's name. So let's say Charles Dickens, classic literature, huh? What happens is all these other authors who write similar material to Charles Dickens show up. So you want to know about another author who writes similar topics to what you're interested in? Here it is. William Faulkner supposedly writes similarly to Charles Dickens. Scott Fitzgerald, all works of fiction in the canon of classical literature. All right, that's literaturemap.com for you. Now here is Goodreads. You do is here's the search bar. Type in an author or a title. Let's try Stephen King, classic horror, and search. No, thank you. And then all of these titles by Stephen King show up, including the title that we typed to begin with. So let's just say if you enjoy reading books by an author, you only know one or two different titles. So this is what you use to type in the author's name to find out what else that author has put out. Okay, that's Goodreads. However, Novelist Plus is a source for Reader's Advisory that can only be accessed through a computer in a library that has a subscription to Novelist Plus. So unfortunately, one cannot access it remotely from home. But when you are in a library that is subscribed to Novelist Plus, this is how it works. You go to your library's homepage. Here in the case of Warner Public Library, at the left top of the screen, you have Westchester Library Systems, catalogs, and databases. Right there. Presentation picture 2. And then the list of databases come up. So the 7th one down, right here, is Novelist. Very good. So far, so good. So once you have access to Novelist Plus, you can type by author, you can search by title. So first we try doing it by author. Type in the author's name, Oscar Wilde, who is another author within the canon of classical literature. Oscar Wilde, then search right there. So far, so good. Then all these titles by Oscar Wilde pop up, including the picture of Dorian Gray, one of the most notable works of the author Oscar Wilde. And then what happens is when you click on the title, there it is to the left, and to the right, at the top right of the screen, is Read Alikes. You click on Read Alikes, and then other authors and other titles that are very similar to that which you are searching for show up, giving you recommendations on topics, titles, and authors of similar interest. So that's Novelist Plus. Those are 3 notable resources for Reader's Advisory. So let's do some book review. I have chosen to review 5 books of various categories. Let's start with Dr. Sleep by Stephen King. It is the sequel to The Shining. It's a good story if you don't expect it to be as good as The Shining, but when are sequels ever as good as the original, except for very rare cases? A group of supernatural beings stay alive throughout the centuries by killing children and breathing in the victim's life force as they die. It is suspenseful and the threat is very powerful. It will creep you out. It'll definitely rekindle childhood fears of being chased by the boogeyman. Once again, that's Dr. Sleep by Stephen King, sequel to The Shining. Next book, Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. It's about vampires and occult themes. It's not so much horror as mystery with horrific elements in it. It plays on the concept of a higher power and what beings would do if severed from the essence of that higher power. It also enforces the idea that vampires are not just hungry killers, but have a multifaceted existence and culture of their own. So in some subtle ways, it also plays on anti-racism themes as well. Next book, Death's Mistress by Terry Goodkind. It's fantasy. It's part of that fantasy spectrum of castles, kingdoms, sword and sorcery. There is a male and female protagonist. They are married. They have been appointed by the magical higher-ups to fight together against human and dark magical threats. It will make you fear for their lives and the lives of those they are meant to protect. So everybody knows about Game of Thrones just because of how the market has blown that up. But there are so many different books in that spectrum of fantasy that belong to castles, kingdoms, sword and sorcery, many others besides Game of Thrones. So again, that's Death's Mistress by Terry Goodkind. Next, we have The Picture of Dorian Gray by the author Oscar Wilde. This is one of few books that I have personally read that belong to the canon of classical literature. The story is known for its quotes from the main character just as much as for how the story itself unfolds. Dorian Gray is a socialite. He comes from a wealthy family and is frequently in social gatherings. His friend is Henry, and Henry is painting a picture of him. The supernatural element to the story is that the picture ages, but Dorian himself does not age. He values aesthetics over morality. He appreciates the beauty of something over any degree of moral consequence that something might inflict. What is aesthetic? What it means is physical and visual appeal. Dorian Gray believes that sin is only a man-made concept, and so he commits deeds that moral society would deem as sinful for the sake of his own aesthetic gratification. As Dorian continues to sin, it is his portrait that ages and corrupts in its features and expression. I personally suppose that the conclusion of this story suggests that morality is important, and that the consequences of completely disregarding morality out of self-interests do exist. Maybe the story could even be said to exhibit a conceptual war between aestheticism versus Christianity. Next, we have Mornings on Horseback by David McCullough. Biography of Our 26th President Theodore Roosevelt. This biography explains how Theodore Roosevelt started his life as a sickly, frail child. His father was disappointed because he wanted his son to be the epitome of strength. He is noted for having said to young Theodore, Theodore, you have the mind, but you have not the body. And without the help of the body, the mind cannot go as far as it should. I am giving you the mind, but it is up to you to make the body. And so his father took him on many hunting trips in the woods. Therefore, Theodore did become a strong person, making his father proud, but he knew that there was a necessary balance between strength and sensitivity to be upheld. On a hunting venture, his hunting mates were about to kill a young bear cub, but Theodore did not allow it. He called it unsportsmanlike behavior, and so he earned himself the nickname Teddy. The story also explains how what the Democratic and the Republican parties represented in those times and how they opposed each other differed from how they do so today. Last book is The Camel Club by David Baldacci. This story falls under the spectrum of law enforcement thrillers, of which there are many kinds. There are courtroom dramas, many of which were written by renowned author John Grisham. We have local police department thrillers, many of which are written by author James Patterson. This, however, The Camel Club by David Baldacci, is a Central Intelligence counterterrorism thriller. You could say it plays out a lot like a movie, with shootings, explosions, car thefts, people not being who they seem. So that is my book review, as well as my education on how to use resources for Reader's Advisory. Thank you.